All right, we had just in the last video set up our line art within Photoshop, but our line art layer is a vector smart object. So we're not going to rasterize that. Instead, we're going to color behind it, and we have a white background. And this is 8 by 10 inches by 350 pixels per inch. So far, so good. We were looking at these slides at the end of the video and understanding the process. And the minimum process I want all of you to try is to push it to duotone hard edge, or sometimes called cut edge color. But we have to start with flat local color. So let's understand what that is. Back before the 1990s, coloring for publications was actually pretty limited. These were this was the full palette of colors that was possible for comic books, for cheap printing on newsprint, right? You could do a little bit more with high gloss, kind of 300 ppi images. But everything was mixed from just cyan, magenta, yellow inks with black on white paper. And these were the different codes. So every old comic you look at, it's not quite old enough. That's not quite old enough. That's not quite old enough. Where are my old ones? Here we go. Like All-Star Squadron, right? The flat coloring had to be very carefully chosen to fit within what was possible, as just basically 20% mixes of cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. Nowadays, especially with digital comics like this, you'll see far more colors, right? Thousands of colors used in digital coloring, but it's a very different kind of look, right? And so even when it's digital color here with a lot of line art, this is just flat color. But these colors, some of them don't exist on this basic palette from pre-digital, right? So at this step, before we start coloring in, as I've done here, it's good to find inspirations. So this is a flat color inspiration of a feathered serpent. This is a duotone hard-edged, nice animated example of inspiration. I like some of the colors there, for sure, kind of jewel tones. Here's a comic book example. It's flat color for the most part. There's a little bit of duotone on the underside here. That's from Marvel. And then this one is clip art, but this is duotone hard edge. Some nice jewel tones there. That might be useful. This one is soft edged and a lot more saturated. And then this one's from DC. And I guess there's a feathered serpent costume on the ground or something. But this is flat color. But it's more contemporary flat color. So you see all of these different colors, like the fluorescent yellows. Notice you don't really have fluorescent yellow here. Like the best you can get is 100% yellow. So what I want you to do is find color inspirations and then just save them to your computer. So the ones I'm going to find most helpful, I really like this one. So I'm going to save that just onto my desktop. I like this one quite a bit. I'm going to save that onto my desktop. And I guess just to cover me, I like this one. It doesn't matter if it has watermarks or not. We're just using this as color inspiration and technique inspiration. So 2 of them are what's called duotone hard edge, and 1 of them is just flat color. The first step is flat color. So what do? We take our line art, like you see here, and then if we're a professional, which means we're working for a company as a flatter, this is what we do next. We put solid flat colors behind each local thing. So the hand gets its own color, the sleeve gets its own color, the wall gets its own color, the rock with the skull gets its own color, the back wall, the door, all of them get their own color. But you'll notice these colors actually aren't necessarily what you would think the colors would be. Like I wouldn't think that the beard of this little gnome would be hot pink, right? And that's because flatting is a little bit different than local flat color. But as you can see here with this past student example, flat color starts by just filling in the shapes behind your lines. This is very, very thin line art for kind of an animated look, and then just flat color put in. So if we look at Wonder Woman here, we're at this stage. You take everything that would have its own skin color, its local color. Like Charlie Brown's shirt is different than his shoes, right? They each have a different local color. So we have skin tone, and then we have, I use Wonder Woman as the example throughout the slides because she has the primaries, yellow, blue, and red. If it's solid black like her hair, it just stays solid black, and that's usually done in the inking. These are all flat color examples of Wonder Woman. And notice, even when the inking is really heavy and gives you a lot of the illusion of light and form, the color is just flat, because black and white are not colors. So even when there are white highlights, that does not change this from being just flat color. And flat color is difficult. It's more difficult than you would think because you really have to choose the right colors, right? So it's really subtle, but her skin is actually a different color than that background white. So this is the difference between what we're going to be doing, which is local flat color, and flatting, which is what professionals do. Professionals do this so that they can then hand this file off for the colorist to decide to change that fluorescent green for that brown. And though this looks a lot less interesting to me visually than this, that's the decision of the artist to decide how colorful or not colorful, how saturated or not saturated, how realistic or how fanciful it's going to be. But by using kind of really, really strong flats here, it's easy to select them. So that's what we're going to start with. And then we'll see examples of it done really, really well. So I'm going to go to Photoshop, and I'm going to bring in some of my inspiration images. Just drag and drop them in, and then squeeze them into the corner. We'll also be doing this for digital painting, because if you have it open in the Photoshop file, you can actually steal color directly from it, instead of having to rely on the color selector or your palettes. So just like when we were compositing, I'm just dragging and dropping these in, and I'll probably steal colors from all of them. And I can flip them if I need to. And I can even set them to multiply if I need to, so if they don't overlap my line art. All right, now how can I set this up? Those are my inspirations, right, or my color reference. So what I'm going to do is select all of those. You can have more than 3. I have 3. Put them in a folder. Call that folder color reference, and then lock that folder in Photoshop. I know it feels like a while since we've been using layers in Photoshop. Also, we are going to, I'll move that below my line art. We're going to keep our line art at the very top. So this is what I call the digital coloring sandwich. You build a sandwich between 2 pieces of bread, right? We're going to use white bread at the bottom. So our background, I'm going to rename it blank white, just by double clicking it. And then I'm going to lock it so it's truly locked. That's our white bread. That's our Wonder Bread on the bottom. And then on the top is our black line art. And I'm going to label it that. Just rename the layer. And it is a vector, and it is a smart object, and we do not touch it. It means we do not ever rasterize it. So I'm also going to lock that layer. So right now I have 3 layers that are locked, because in between my black bread, which is on the top, and my white bread, which is on the bottom, is everything we want for our digital coloring sandwich. Right now we just have reference. So what's the most basic sandwich that I really enjoy? It's a grilled cheese sandwich. Just has 1 layer in between 2 slices of bread. So if I'm going to make a grilled cheese sandwich, I'm going to make that layer on top of the white bread, and I'm going to call this my flat local color layer. I'll put in parentheses cheese. Right? I'll even mark it yellow. So this is the only unlocked layer. That's where I'm going to add color behind my line art. How can I do that? Well, because my line art is nicely contained, and all of you should have at least some parts of your line art that's nicely contained, I'm going to start by just using my paint bucket, right? So I'm going to use the paint bucket. It's underneath the gradient tool. And if I hold down Option while using the paint bucket, that will select whatever color I click on, whether the layer is locked or not, whether I've selected that layer or not. And you'll see it will find it in the color selector, and it will put it in my foreground color. And if some of that is not true for you, we need to reset up your Photoshop defaults. Sometimes students accidentally get it where it's filling in the background color instead. So try flipping it in that case. Right? But it should, as you hold down Option with the paint bucket, it should fill in the foreground color. And pick a color. So I actually like this kind of golden yellow right there. And then I'm on this layer. If I click, it will fill the entire thing, right? Because there's no boundaries to it. So instead of that, what I do is I click on my black vector layer, keep it locked, but I'm going to use the magic wand at 32 with contiguous turned on. And I'm going to click in the areas that I want to fill with that color. So I think it'd be cool to have that kind of golden yellow around the eyes and maybe on the crown. And because these shapes are contained, even though the vector layer is locked, I'm going to get a perfectly clean selection. As I hold down Shift, I'm adding to my selection with this magic wand, and I'm clicking on all these little donut shapes that I want to fill with one color. Now the beauty of flatting is that even if I decide later to change its color, this has already done a lot for me. Because as long as it's filled in with any selectable color, it's easy to change. So now I go to my flat color layer, I go back to my paint bucket, and I just drop it in anywhere. And because on the coloring layer there is no boundary between them, it will fill in everywhere I selected. And then I hit Command D to deselect. Okay, now very early on at this stage, I start to realize I like grilled cheese, but I like different types of cheeses. And some of them are just slightly different than each other, and it's hard for me to tell what that looks like on a bright white background. So I'm going to duplicate my white bread at the bottom, Command J, and I'm going to fill it with middle gray. I'm not going to do black, but I am going to do middle gray, because that can help me see my color a little bit better. And then I'm also going to lock that, because you can see how differently that color looks. So now I want to fill in some big shapes. So I'm going to go for some bold colors. So I'm going to go back to my black line art, back to my magic wand, and I'm going to start selecting these triangles. Hold down Shift. And if your shapes aren't contained, I'll show you how to deal with that. All right, and then maybe here, and then maybe here. So remember, as long as you fill it with something, then we can fill it later. Now, if I try to use my paint bucket and hold down Option, I can select the color I want, which is going to be this orange. But if I'm on the black line art layer, notice it won't let me paint anything. That's why you lock it. So I have to go to my only unlocked layer and then drop it in. All right, now, see what that looks like on gray? Yeah, looking better. Now, what's a really light color? I'm going to hold down Option. I'm going to steal the tooth color here. And yeah, that's almost pure white. So I'm actually going to go to this skin color here, which is a little off of white, because I don't like to color with pure white. And now I'm going to select from my line art with the